Imagine your heating dies tomorrow. No blanket, no hot chocolate, just you and the killing cold. Now imagine that cold isn't temporary. That's Tuesday. 10,000 years straight. That was the reality for our ancestors. Wild part, they survived. We're talking 300,000 years back. Modern humans and our cousins, the Neanderthals. Think Scandinavian winters are rough? You have no idea what's coming. Last Glacial Maximum, 20,000 years ago. Earth ran about 6 degrees colder. 6 degrees sounds tiny. It's the gap between London, the city, and London under ice. Ice sheets buried much of North America, Europe, and Asia for thousands of kilometers. Even the ice-free zones could drop to cold modern gear couldn't beat for a week, yet the land teemed with life. Woolly mammoths, cave bears, cave lions. Irish elk wore antlers spanning 3.7 meters. These beasts were terrifying. They were the deadliest danger and the most vital resource at once. Remember that. And the map itself was alien. Seas dropped 120 meters. Coastlines vanished. Britain joined Europe. Beringia bridged Siberia and Alaska. People walked under today's ocean. Cold, deadly, breathtaking. Packed with people learning not to die. So how? Start with the obvious one that never gets enough credit. Fire. We've controlled fire for 400,000 to a million years. It was ancient already. Wonderwork Cave in South Africa shows controlled fire going back roughly a million years. But fire wasn't only warmth, it was a survival system doing 15 jobs at once. Cooking unlocked calories, more usable energy from the very same food. Biologist Richard Wrangham argues cooking is literally why the human brain grew so big. We traded gut tissue for brain tissue. Fire didn't just warm us, it made us smarter. Fire also held back predators through the long, lethal nights. A cave lion weighed 300 kilos and feared nothing. A roaring fire was your bodyguard. It hardened spear tips. Lit 16-hour darkness let stories pass between people. It dried wet clothing. The line between comfort and deadly hypothermia. Lose your fire in a blizzard with no way to relight it? That could be a death sentence. So firekeepers, the people who guarded the flame, may have been the most vital of all. Now shelter. Think they crawled into any random cave? You'll be pleasantly surprised. A deep cave holds steady. 10 to 13 degrees year-round. No matter the storm outside. Cave walls blend and an extreme cold wind almost as fast temperature. But caves weren't always handy. Game moved, people followed. Used caves had real interior design. Stone fire pits, sleeping zones, tool areas. This wasn't an animal in a hole. This was planned, deliberate use of space. And then there are the mammoth bone houses. Yes, you read that right. In Ukraine, Mezhirich, 15,000 years ago, circular homes from hundreds of bones. Bones interlocked into walls, then hides stretched tight, windproof, near waterproof. Now picture what that took. No hardware store, no timber, no nails, no concrete, just an enormous dead mammoth, stone tools, and a lot of shared cleverage. Some of these structures used remains from over 150 staggering feet of organizing sources, sourcing specific bones, specific structural jobs. Hunted or scavenged, still debated, but the verdict is clear. This is architecture. Prehistoric, bone-based, but architecture nonetheless. Inside, archaeologists found hearths, decorated objects, and food processing. Proof these were genuine homes, not emergent shelters. Homes where people cooked, made tools, and raised children, waiting out the long northern winters together. And together is the part that mattered most. Cooked food changed everything. Heat broke down tough fibers, so the body pulled far more usable energy from every bite. Evolutionary biologist Richard Wrangham argued cooking is literally what let the human brain grow so large. Evolutionary. We basically traded gut tissue for brain tissue. Fire didn't just keep us warm, fire made us smarter. Fire also held the dark at bay. A cave lion weighing up to 300 kilograms had no reason to fear a small human. A roaring fire was a reliable bodyguard. Predators back off. You sleep. You survive to see. Fire hardened wooden spear tips and deadlier gave light through 60. It dried wet clothing in frozen conditions, the difference between comfort and hypothermia, and heated caves enough for the body to function. Here's the open loop. Most important person in the group may not have been the strongest hunter at all. Losing your fire in a blizzard with no way to relight it could be a death sentence. So firekeepers mattered. The person whose whole job was keeping the communal flame alive may have been among the vital members. How about shelter? If you think they just crawled into any cave and called it home, you're in for a surprise. Deep cave holds a stable temperature year-round, somewhere between 10 and 13 degrees, no matter what's raging out. Cave walls also block wind, and an extreme cold wind chill can push survivable temperatures into lethal territory within minutes. But caves weren't always where people needed to be. When none was nearby, they didn't sit in the snow and hope. They built. Caves that were used show sophisticated layouts, stone-lined fire pits, sleeping areas, separate zones for tool making and food prep. This wasn't an animal hiding in a hole. This was deliberate, planned use of space, interior design, survival. And then there are the mammoth bone houses. Yes, entire homes built almost entirely from mammoth bones. The most famous come from Mezhirich in Ukraine, roughly 15,000 years old. Hundreds of bones interlocked, solid hammers, shoulder blades, jaw bones, vertebrae. carefully stacked into walls, and covered with hides stretched tight against the wind. Think about it. No hardware store, no timber, no nails. Just a dead mammoth, stone tools, and serious collective intelligence. They figured out that bracing curved bones a certain way, with tusks tied overhead as a ridge beam, gives a windproof shelter. Some of these structures needed remains from over 150 individual mammoths. The scale of resource organization is simply staggering. Whether the mammoths were hunted or scavenged is still debated, but these builders sourced specific bones for specific structural jobs. This is architecture. Prehistoric bone-based architecture, but architecture nonetheless, planned and transported to a chosen site. Inside, hearths, decorated objects, signs of food processing. These were real homes where people cooked, made tools, raised children. If your mind is buzzing now, hang on, because how they survived together is even stranger than how they built. Modern culture loves the lone survivor making fire from wet sticks for the cameras. Ancient humans did the precise opposite on purpose. Bands ran from 20 to 50 in a core group, linked into wider networks of hundreds or thousands across a territory. These weren't just convenient social arrangements. They were carefully maintained survival infrastructure, and everyone in the group knew it. In winter, with resources scarce and the margin for error at zero, you needed specialists, each a thread in one rope. You needed the butcher who could pull every calorie from a carcass, organs, marrow, and the fat deposits most people overlook. You needed the one who knew which plants still hid nutritious roots beneath a meter of snow and exactly where to dig. And you needed the elder who remembered the brutal winter 15 years ago and which lone valley still held deer back then. They built community deliberately and understood a hard truth. Individual survival was inseparable from the survival of the whole group. The dark winter months when outdoor work was limited were likely the prime time for passing knowledge from one mind to the next. Stories told around the fire weren't entertainment. They were education. Generations of survival knowledge packaged into narratives that could be remembered. The old woman who knew every plant for 100 kilometers wasn't a burden on the group. It was a library irreplaceable. Now, here's a problem you'd never guess. We are biologically naked apes, almost no body hair compared to other primates. Unclothed in sub-zero cold, a human loses heat faster than they make it and dies of hypothermia within hours. Clothing saved us. Scientists dated clothing cleverly. Body lice, which live in fabric, split from head lice about 170,000 years ago. That's the earliest sign humans regularly covered themselves, but simple covering soon evolved into something far more sophisticated. By the Upper Paleolithic 40,000 to 10,000 years ago, the evidence for advanced clothing technology becomes extraordinary and honestly humbling. Scientists pinned down when clothing began using a clever trick, the split between head lice and body lice, which live only in fabric. Body lice branched off roughly 170,000 years. Our earliest hint that humans had started regularly covering their bare skin with something, but simple covering became something far more sophisticated. By the Upper Paleolithic, the clothing technology gets genuinely humbling. Picture a needle so fine its eye is barely a millimeter wide, a tiny sliver of bone that quietly rewrote what survival looked like. Bone needles from Europe and Siberia are so precise that modern researchers using only period tools struggle to recreate them at all. And if this layered Ice Age tailoring is already impressing you, wait until you see what they buried 2 children in 34,000 years ago. At the Sungir burial site in Russia, 2 children were laid to wearing garments sewn with thousands of individually carved ivory beads. Reconstructing those clothes revealed a layered system, a snug inner layer, an insulating middle layer, and a tough outer shell against wind and water. Hoods, trousers, boots. It's almost exactly the layering system modern mountaineers swear by, and they arrived at it 34,000 years ago. They reached it through pure trial and error. The people who got it wrong died. The people who got it right survived and passed the knowledge on. The hides themselves were softened by brain tanning, using the animal's own brain tissue mixed with water to preserve the leather and make it supple. Every hunted animal gave food, footwear, blankets, tent covers, and bags. Nothing was wasted, as in these conditions, nothing could afford to be. Here's something your body hides, so you're already in trouble. Staying warm in real cold burns a brutal number of calories. In extreme cold, your metabolism can climb by 50% or more just to hold your core temperature. Add hunting and hauling, and the demand becomes staggering. Eat too little out there, and you didn't just feel tired. You turned hypothermic, thinking slowed, your coordination failed, and you died, often fast. So in the Ice Age, one thing outranked everything else on the menu. Not protein, not carbs. Fat became the supreme currency of survival. Fat is the densest fuel there is. More than twice the energy per gram of protein or carbs. And it's exactly what the body burns to make heat. This is why the giant megafauna mattered so much. A mature woolly mammoth could weigh up to 6 tons, much of it dense, life-saving fat. A single adult mammoth could in theory yield around 500,000 calories, enough to keep a band of 25 people fed for several weeks at a stretch. But hunting one was no small thing. A mammoth could outweigh 6 modern cars, with tusks that impaled and the smarts to defend itself in a tight herd. So they outthought it, They drove mammoths into boggy ground, ambushed them at river crossings, and used fire and noise to steer panicked animals toward prepared kill sites. Coordination this took, planning, the shared expertise, the trust, reveals a level of cognitive and social organization that's honestly extraordinary. Then came a new problem. How do you store 500,000 calories of meat with no fridge? Simple. You use the fact that the whole world is a fridge. Permafrost, ground frozen solid year-round was everywhere. People dug caches straight into it, using the Earth's own deep freeze to keep meat for months. For what couldn't be frozen, they dried it, slicing meat thin and curing it over fire or in cold, dry winter air to stretch its shelf life dramatically. And in the Ice Age version of an energy bar, they made something close to pemmican, dried pulverized meat rendered fat, sometimes berries lasting months without spoiling. So autumn wasn't a season of rest. It was frantic, organized, large-scale preparation, hunting hard, drying, caching, the whole community racing to stockpile enough for spring. And the storage pits show they didn't just stockpile enough, they deliberately over-prepared, building a buffer against the worst case. That is an instinct. That's planning under uncertainty. But not every group chose to dig in and endure the winter at all. Some of them looked at the freezing dark ahead and simply left. The evidence for seasonal migration is everywhere. Reindeer and bison roamed hundreds of kilometers between ranges, and the people who lived off them followed. In Upper Paleolithic Europe, the records suggest many groups spent summers in the uplands, then dropped into sheltered river valleys once winter closed in. Valleys blocked the worst winds and kept water flowing where rivers refused to fully freeze. They also drew the game down so humans and prey converged in the same place. And here's the giveaway. These migrations weren't improvised. Specific types of stone show up hundreds of kilometers from where they were quarried. There's only one explanation. They moved along known routes between known places, carrying materials because they knew exactly where they were headed, planned to return. They carried mental maps spanning hundreds of kilometers, the routes, the seasonal timing, how long each leg took, exactly what to pack. This wasn't wandering, it was strategy. Fire, shelter, clothing, food, migration, every single one shares the same hidden route. They all flow from one extraordinary human gift, the human ability to think about the future, to model a problem before it arrives, invent a solution ever personally faced. No other animal does this at our level. Bison doesn't reason, this winter looks brutal, I should leave early. A bear doesn't stockpile extra because the signs look bad. Ancient human did both, then explain the reasoning to the group. The cave paintings of Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira, roughly 40,000 to 17,000 years old, usually called art. They're probably more than that. Some researchers think they doubled as visual databases, records of which animals lived where, when they appeared, how they behaved. Art as survival technology stored on the most permanent medium available, rock. But survival wasn't only about the body. Months trapped in the dark, hungry, knowing some of you might not see spring, that's a recipe for a group to tear itself apart. And they seem to have understood that intuitively. Ritual, shared ceremony, music, bone flutes 40,000 years old, all point to deliberately tending the group's morale through darkest months. Here's the deeper truth. Every trick we've covered, fire, shelter, clothing, stored fat, all of it springs from one strange human gift, the ability to imagine a winter that hasn't arrived yet. No other animal does this at the human level. A bison in October doesn't reason, this winter looks brutal, I should head south early. It simply follows the herd in the cold. A bear doesn't cache extra food because the signs hint at a long season. But an ancient human did exactly that, then explained the reasoning to the group and listened to what they said back. That single gift, modeling a future that doesn't exist yet, is the engine under everything. Think of it as a tiny fire lit inside the skull, throwing light onto tomorrow before tomorrow arrived. Here's where the cave paintings come back in. Lascaux, Chauvet, Altamira, painted roughly 40,000 to 17,000 years ago, are usually called art. They probably were, but they may have been something more useful too. The animals are painted with startling anatomical accuracy. Horses, aurochs, reindeer, caught in real poses and real behavior. Some researchers think the walls worked partly as visual databases, records of which animals were around when. Art as survival technology, information stored on the most permanent medium they had, solid rock updated across generations so the knowledge outlived the people who carried it. The library never burned because it was the wall itself. Then there's the part nobody mentions, the mind itself. Long winters, confined spaces, dwindling food. Quiet knowledge that someone in the group might not see spring. That's a recipe for collapse from the inside. They seem to have understood this in their bones. Bone flutes dating back 40,000 years have been found. Actual music in the depth of the Ice Age. Ritual, ceremony, shared song, deliberately cultivated cultivated to hold people together. The logic is brutally simple. A group that keeps its morale through the darkest months survives. A group that fragments, that turns on itself, does not. Music and ritual weren't luxuries, they were load-bearing. So step back and look at the whole picture. These weren't people merely coping with their environment, hanging on by their fingernails. They were managing it actively, deliberately, with strategy. They shaped the land with controlled fire, steered animal populations with selective hunting, and steadied their own minds with culture. Picture a single hand reaching out and gently turning the whole frozen world like a tool. The human relationship with winter was never passive endurance. It was active, intelligent, collective problem-solving at a scale and a sophistication that we, warm and comfortable, consistently and badly underestimate. Remember the firekeeper from the start of all this? The unglamorous one who simply kept the flame alive? Multiply that quiet, essential role across food, shelter, clothing, memory, and music. That web of specialists is the real hero here. And that thread runs straight to you. The fact that you exist, reading this in a heated room, means 1,000 winters were won by people you'll never know, each one passing the fire forward, one more season. Every layered jacket you own is a copy of a system perfected at Sungear 34,000 years ago. Every food you freeze echoes a cache dug into permafrost. We didn't invent survival. We inherited it. We traded all of it. The firekeep, the bone needles, the mammoth bone houses, the mental maps spanning hundreds of kilometers for central heating, supermarkets, Vortex, and the ability to order soup from a phone at midnight, which is, on balance, a tremendous trade. No complaints, but it's worth remembering the deal was only ours to make because someone, somewhere very cold, refused to lie down in the snow. They had no thermostat, no IKEA blanket, no hot chocolate, no warm meal arriving at the door. They had fire, each other, and a mind that could picture spring while standing in the dead of winter. That picture in the mind, spring, green, survivable, was the real tool. Sharper than any flint blade. It's the one we still carry every time we plan past a hard day toward an easier one. So the next time your heating clicks on without a thought, give a small nod to the firekeep, the seamstresses, the mammoth hunters, and the old woman who was a living library. You are the spring they planned for. 10,000 years of brutal winters. Generations who got it wrong and didn't make it, and generations who got it right and answer on. That unbroken chain ends for now. You. They didn't just survive the cold. They outthought it. And in doing so, they quietly built the foundations of planning, cooperation, and storytelling, everything we civilization still stands on today. So imagine waking tomorrow with no heat, no blanket, no warm meal at the door, just you and the cold. Now know this, somewhere in you is the mind that already beat it 10,000 winters running.